Southampton, 1938. Rendezvous of ocean liners. Britain's premier passenger port. Gateway to the world. A haven of tranquil efficiency with an infinite capacity for taking the strains imposed on her by visitors flooding in from both hemispheres. But when in 1939 the blast of war blew in her ears, Southampton, with a nascent energy, collected within her ocean gates a mighty stream of war material to aid the champions of democracy in their bitter fight against the monster of Nazism, let loose on a Europe trembling and unprepared. Southampton was at once a frontline port, a role not new to her. She'd played it so well in the last war. Since then, huge land reclamations and extensive additions to her docks had fitted her for the gigantic task on which she was now about to embark. The needs of the BEF had to be met, and their supplies, countless objects in enormous quantities, had to be shipped. The ships and the docks to accommodate them were there, at Southampton. Though the tempo had quickened, the proverbial dock's efficiency remained unimpaired. The slogan, "Southern for service, yet obtained." With the supplies came the men, the advance guard of that heroic company which was to fight and lose in that first tragic episode on the fair fields of France. The boys of the BEF, with spirits high and yet untrammeled by apprehension, faced their immediate future with a firm conviction that the right would triumph in the end, and that their cause was right, though the end did not come for many a long day. These were days of intensive activity and excitement at Southampton docks. Men, supplies, in fact the whole panoply of war, passed continuously through the sheds and over the quays. The Southern Railway personnel worked ceaselessly in cooperation with the military. On a flood tide of high adventure, the BEF embarked for destinations somewhere in France. As a prelude to future operations, liners, famous in their peacetime roles, took over their job of war work and steamed away to act as transports for Dominion troops. Many southern ships, which heretofore had played big parts in Britain's business and pleasure trips, went to war with the best of them. Among them was the little Sandown, which for years had paddled her docile way between Portsmouth and Ryde. Here she is, equipped to sweep enemy mines from our shores and from the paths of our vessels. But in spite of ceaseless vigilance by the minesweepers, Southampton reaped a bitter harvest of damaged ships. Up to D-Day, over 800 of them were reconditioned in the dockyard shops. The disastrous fall of France brought its inevitable complications. To rescue the hordes of troops and civilians escaping from the continental beaches, a whole navy of little ships cooperated in a superhuman task. Southampton, with other British ports, received a motley throng of ships of all types and sizes and berthed them at her hospitable quays, a temporary refuge from the rapacious maw of total war. And so the vagabond army came and went, ceaselessly, for 2 weeks or more. Men humiliated and bewildered, in dire need of creature comforts and sympathy, in spite of their tribulations, defeat was not written on their faces. In the wake of the fallen BEF came a small, pathetic body of refugees from the Channel Islands. Their sea-girt homes had become the early prey of the Nazi hordes. The welfare services of Southampton operated splendidly. There was a warm welcome for these unhappy people whose immediate needs were speedily catered for. Even in war, Southern for service still meant something, and with a word of good cheer they were dispatched. Now the beast of war had given his command, and the skies over England rang to the echo with the thundering hoofbeats of the apocalyptic horsemen. With unparalleled fury, The Luftwaffe attacked. Death and devastation were everywhere. At Southampton, the dock employees worked with a frenzied energy to avert total disaster threatened by the destruction of their ARP control. Direct hits on a flour mill and a cold storage depot proved catastrophic. The ensuing fire burned for weeks, consuming a month's rations of meat and fats for the whole of southern England. The firemen's vain attempts to save them were seriously hampered by a sea of molten butter, which spread ankle-deep all over the dock area, rendering the drains useless. The heat of the fires raging was so great that much of the water from the hoses turned to steam before it reached the actual fires. When at last they did subside, the ruined shells of warehouses, offices, and rolling stock remained everywhere. Yet another victim of Nazi villainy had been sacrificed. But the docks could take it, like the rest of the blitzed towns of Britain, and so Southampton smouldered on. Meanwhile, the dock workers remained still very much alive. Colonel Moore Brabazon, then Minister of Transport, came to Southampton to congratulate the Southern's ARP squads on their laudable efforts and efficiency. In this dark hour of Britain's need, a strong and friendly hand helped her to regain a vantage point from which the future could be regarded with a greater degree of confidence. America began to send over quantities of commodities necessary for the well-being of our peoples and for the effective maintenance of our war effort. The dock's nerve centers twanged with a transatlantic hum, its pulses quickened, and in a short time, Leastland was in full flood. The United States undoubtedly meant business. The dark, swinging silhouettes of Southampton's cranes wove a crazy rhythmic pattern in the sky as they delved into countless holds, bit hungrily into the teeming supplies, and reared again with the life-giving fruits of Anglo-American cooperation hanging pendant in their steely jaws. It was an inspiring sight. For 2 years, Southampton dealt with this huge traffic, both at the quaysides and on the rails as well. In time, the nature of the American shipments changed to something clearly indicative of preparation. Preparation for D-Day. England was now well populated with hordes of husky young Yanks. With them came their engines of war in staggering quantities. Southampton's quays and sheds were crammed with discharged cargoes, and all lines were cleared for this vast priority traffic. Other traffic, coal and such like, which had been growing in volume since the fall of France, was sent in coasters to other British ports. Vital supplies for the much-discussed Second Front continued to pour in from the other side of the Atlantic. To a Britain grim and sorely smarting with a sense of rebellion against the Nazi warlords, the apparently inexhaustible supply of American war power acted on the general morale with tonic effect. No longer was vague hope alone the booster of Britain's spirits. She had regained confidence, the confidence that one day democracy would triumph. At our side stood the United States, strong and equally confident. Together we were going to win. To clinch matters at Southampton, the American staff organized for themselves a major port headquarters to deal with all matters of a transatlantic interest.